February 15th, 2022, special meeting. As a preliminary matter, I am Brian Colleran, Chair of the Newbury Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members are present and can hear me. Conservation Commission members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ben Gahagan.
Yes.
Brad Duffin. We know he's not here. Dan Streeter.
Yes.
Frank Wettenkamp. Again, we know he's not here. Mary Rimmer. Again, she will be showing up later. And Peter Pecos.
Hello.
And town staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Samantha Holt.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good evening. This February 15th, 2022 open meeting of the Newbury Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely consistent with the act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, which extends the governor's March 12, 2020 order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law until April 1st, 2022. This order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location and allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that attendees are participating by video and/or telephone conference, and the recording will be available on the Newbury Access YouTube channel. Before we turn to the topic of the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I, as chair, will introduce each item on the agenda for all attendees except commission members and staff. Please remember to mute your computer or your phone when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. Please be aware that video participants can see you and that you should take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. If commission members wish to engage in discussion with other members, please do so through me, taking care to identify yourself when you wish to speak. And specifically to this meeting, we are going to set it up as a 1-hour public comment segment in the middle of the meeting. And as we were expecting more people in the audience, we were planning on giving everyone 5 minutes. I think we can be a little more flexible in that for the moment. Samantha is planning on displaying a Word document that she'll be writing in as we go through this with a timer on screen so that you know how much time you have left in your allotted 5-minute section. Please state your name and address for the record before proceeding with your comments. And commission members are going to refrain from responding or engaging with any specific questions in the course of that 1-hour section so that we can do it all at the end. We'll do a dedicated half hour where, you know, if we get a dozen comments on a specific thing, instead of responding to everybody one at a time, we'll just respond to the topic itself at the end. And we'll just know that there's a dozen people that want to hear the answer. The chat feature has been disabled for this meeting. And again, everyone's expected to conduct themselves in the same manner they would an in-person meeting. Disruptions will be addressed once by myself and then once by Sam. And Sam is going to be very strict with the mute button and the kicking people out button. So the first piece of this meeting too will be the commission sort of talking amongst ourselves about what we have in mind, what's motivating us, why we think this is a process worth engaging with, and what we want to get out of it, and what we think the town will benefit by going through this law. And then we'll go to the public comment, and then we'll go back to sort of discussing amongst the commission what commentary and feedback we get. And while I don't think we're going to be taking any votes other than closing the meeting, the one vote will be conducted by roll call vote. And with that, yeah.
You guys see that?
Yeah, it's coming through.
Excellent.
So, first item on the agenda, discussing the bylaw and what the commission would like to do about it. More formally, let me go read my motion because now you're taking up my screen, Sam.
You should be able to kind of like pop it back.
Oh no, I did already. I just wasn't ready for it.
Sorry.
Hey, preparation is better than there's options. So technically, the first item on our agenda is written up as the public workshop. This meeting is being held to conduct a public workshop to continue developing the proposed amendments to the Town of Newbury Wetlands Bylaw, Chapter 95. We'll also begin discussing the development of draft regulations related to the proposed bylaw. This will be a working meeting to hear public input on the proposed amendments and associated regulations. And again, from 7 to 7:30, commission discussion, from 7:30 to 8:30, public comment and discussion, limited to 5-minute sections. And then for an hour of that, and then 8:30 to 9, commission response to questions. So let's get rolling. As I tend to do, I'm going to turn to the rest of the commission first. Do we want to do this alphabetically? Ben, you want to go first, or do you want to give Pete reverse alphabetical?
I don't really know what you want from me, so I'm going to give it to Pete. I mean, I can give it.
Well, here, you know what? I'll do it first, and then I'll be the role model. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So my motivation and interest in pursuing this bylaw has a lot to do with the numerous examples over the last few years of projects that come in and get bogged down in gray area where the State Wetlands Protection Act does not provide clear guidance. To provide guidance that would shorten the process and make things more clear. Additionally, I am interested in protecting those resource areas that the State Wetlands Protection Act does not protect. They are left out of the law. An easy example being vernal pools. They get treatment in the state law if they're part of another resource area, but they're not considered a resource area themselves, and I think that they should be. I think everybody likes the sound of wood frogs in the evening, and we should protect that. But that's yeah, and that's sort of my motivation and what's pushing me, and why the developments and the projects that I've seen coming have given me the opinion that the state law is insufficient for maintaining the character of Newbury. Okay, how's that been? Good model?
Delightful, thank you. Yep, so I agree with much of what Brian has said regarding trying to provide clarification for applicants and streamline the application and hearing processes. And the perspective I bring in is that I'm fortunate enough to be a fisheries biologist, and I work in coastal communities through really halfway down, almost to Plymouth, through the border with New Hampshire. And so I work in a lot of different towns, and I get to interact with their conservation commissions, and I've seen a lot of different models. The State Wetlands Protection Act is kind of the minimum level of protection in Massachusetts you can give to these resources. And most coastal communities have done something to strengthen certain areas they care about, and as Brian said, to kind of preserve their environment and preserve some of the characteristics of the town that they're in. And I feel like that would be a good thing for Newbury to consider, and especially with over the past few decades, I think people who've lived in town a long time have been fortunate enough to make friends with a lot of people since I moved here about a decade ago, with people who have lived in town, multi-generational families, things like that. And it's really, as with most of coastal New England, a changing landscape, and rapidly changing landscape over the past few decades. So I don't think anybody here envisions the WPA as a tool to restrict development. I know I don't, but I do think that it's important that as more and more areas that were not economically really viable for development, so some of these questions never came up, are now economically viable for development. We just want to protect the resources that are on those properties that really weren't coming into concern before. We may need to give a harder look, as Brian said, to preserve some of the soundscapes and the fauna and flora that we all care about, and why a lot of us moved to town. So I'd like to see some increased protections in a bylaw amendment to allow us to do that effectively and clearly, while not interfering with people's ability to do what they want to do with their property. I think that more or less covers it.
Yeah, I'd say so. All right, did Mary show up? I don't see Mary. All right, so Dan, it looks like that's you next.
You're muted, Dan.
Yeah, you guys have done a good job. We're going to run out of things to say, I think. Yeah, I think my take has been getting rid of those gray areas, as you mentioned. Buffer zones are important, and we know they're important. There's science that supports that fact, and yet we are not currently able to establish realistic setbacks from resource areas. Another thing I don't think has been mentioned is with regulation attached to the bylaw, we will be able to specify administrative actions, which will help for minor projects. We might be able to sort of do that now, but it won't have any real force in effect without a bylaw and regulation. So I see advantages for the applicants, and I see resource areas that are currently have some protection, but could stand for more protection that would be addressed in the bylaw.
And Pete, it looks like we're going to round out with you.
So hopefully I'm unmuted. I think the three previous speakers hit a lot of important topics. You know, for an applicant to know what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, I think having more defined explanation is important. Continuing to protect our resources, of course, are important. And third, it gives better direction for the commission in any areas of question that have arisen in the past or situations that we've seen in the past that we need better guidance. We can have a bylaw that will help direct the commission in its decision. So short and sweet.
Short and sweet. Look at this. We're going to have so much time for everybody in the overflow room to chime in here.
I think if we want to just jump into it kind of quickly before we start like going too crazy into public comment, we might want to go over the drafted regulations first, or not. They're not really drafted regulations. I basically just have a big thing of notes on other towns' regulations, but we can kind of take a look at that maybe before we jump into too much other stuff.
No, that's fair. And we have the time for it. So, Sam,
Brian, can I add one more thing to what I had to say?
Sure.
And just to build off of what something Dan said, that I left one thing out. I think a lot of this hit home on a site walk with a applicant's surveyor and wetland scientist when he said to us, you know, the funny thing about the Massachusetts is a New Hampshire guy. The funny thing about the Massachusetts Wetland Protections Act is it was written by lawyers and really doesn't have anything to do with wetlands. And just it doesn't, you know, and you know, so that was coming from a wetland scientist who was being paid by an applicant, and I think that's kind of getting to what Dan's point was. It's like this is a legal thing that was written by politicians and lawyers, and it has not tracked the science out there for a lot of things that we're concerned about. It hasn't tracked the developments in the literature and in the science, showing that a lot of the protections that when this is getting to be an older act, and when it was drafted, they might have thought that was adequate, but I think that there's plenty of evidence now showing where it could be improved, and those things sometimes take a long time to catch up. But the law does allow, and home rule allows us to act quicker if we want to.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point, Ben. And you know, even to this is a product of the 70s. It gets occasionally updated, but still a product of the 70s. Moved on, and this hasn't. Yeah. So then, Sam, do you have a little blurb ready to spew? A little quickie intro. Let's do maybe 5 minutes for you, and then we'll do 5 minutes to sort of put the people in order. and then we'll get going on the public commentary.
All right. So I know this isn't, when I open it up, it's not going to look quick, but so I went through a couple of different, or a bunch of different towns rather. We had suggestions to look at Harwich and Wellfleet, I believe by town council, as good sort of examples of regulations for different communities or communities that are similar to ours. I also looked at several surrounding communities to Newbury that were a little bit closer by, took a bunch of notes on all of their regulations, specifically the regulations related to inland bylaw stuff, just to kind of get an idea of what other towns have, what their regulations are, specifically relating to things like buffer zones, no disturb zones, regulated activities, different jurisdictional things. And basically what I found is that most places have a 25-foot no disturb zone. A lot have a 50 to 25-foot zone in the buffer zone that's heavily regulated. There are some activities that are allowable, but they're pretty well restricted. It looked like, I think it was Harwich actually that had the most strict sort of restrictions in the buffer zones. They allow next to nothing within 50 feet. It's basically like if you want to put native plantings in between 50 and 25 feet, that's about all you can do. But a lot of towns like around us have, Newburyport has a pretty good setup for their regulations. So I just kind of went through and took notes. A couple down towards the end had pretty skimpy regulations, but the ones that I found earlier on had some pretty good examples of things. So that was just some notes on what other towns have to give us something to base our drafted regulations off of. And just as a kind of reminder, the regulations there's a possibility that these could get finished in time to go to town meeting with the bylaw, but there's also a good chance that these won't be ready. So these are just going to be in draft form pretty much for a while until we can get things more hashed out, especially in terms of the completed bylaw. Obviously getting the bylaw completed on its own is the most important thing than the regulations, but
right.
Yeah.
And to reiterate some earlier conversation that we haven't had yet, the goal of putting the regulations together ahead of any town meeting vote would be to sort of make sure that anyone who might think that we were trying to, pull a proverbial fast one and sneak something in, and get it later in regulations. This is sort of putting out on, laying all the cards and showing everybody everything so that anyone who is to vote in favor of the bylaw sees and understands and has a chance to comment on any regulations that might be promulgated under the bylaw eventually. Anyway, thank you, Sam. That was good. So once more to the commission, we're getting to the 7:30 mark kind of early, which is great. We never do that. But if everybody's good, I think maybe what we should do is just turn to the audience and I see like 8 people, give or take. 11 minus 5 is, okay, 7. 6. Let's just go alphabetical for now. And that might be the simplest way to do it. So to the commission, hearing silence and crickets and nobody chiming in, I'm taking that as you guys being content. Sam, why don't you unmute the top of the alphabet and we'll go from there.
All right. So I'm just gonna go sort of in order of where the videos are showing up. So it looks like Rochelle Joseph is up first.
Or hello.
Actually, sorry, Rochelle, can I, Brian, do we want to do 10 minutes instead since we don't have a lot of people?
Let's aim for 5.
Okay.
If Rochelle, in this case, since now we're apparently going by site order instead of alphabetical, can't do that to me, Sam.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing it in alphabetical order.
Let's go for 5, and if we bleed over, no big deal. We obviously have time to spare, but if we can keep things tight, I think everybody will benefit from it.
Right. All right, Rochelle, you're up.
Forgive me, I'm participating because I care about what you're doing, but I'm not exactly sure what you would like commenting on. Is it questions for specifics, or could you just give me a little guidance?
Okay, fair question.
Thank you.
Honestly, I was expecting a general comment, sort of pro or against, then sort of a broad statement of why you feel that way. And then ideally, if you've looked through our proposed bylaw, something you'd like or dislike about it specifically that then we could actually work on. And if not, just again, broadly or generically, an example of something that you think would be a good idea to either incorporate or take out. But to everybody listening, we do have the draft bylaw on the town website, and it is there. We invite feedback and commentary, and this is just one venue that we're trying to do it. If people were to email Sam or write her letters, or that's all good too. We're just trying to maximize our public input. So,
Yep.
And we can certainly take questions.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I did have, I mean, I've been kind of watching this for about has it been almost a year and a half that you guys have been kind of looking at some of this?
Yes.
Has it been the case?
Just for the record, who are you and where are you from and that whole thing?
Yes, thank you. I'm Rochelle Joseph. I live on Southern Boulevard. I'm a resident of Newbury, and called because we all know that change is happening and that bylaws for wetlands and areas that are coastal are being looked at statewide. And so this is my town. So I guess that's ID.
Good, thank you.
Okay. So I think I just had, I tried to look at the document earlier today. I had studied it a while back. And I'm not as clear as I could be, but I just guess I did want to find out. The understanding is that people who live on Plum Island are not going to be affected. And I guess I'm looking for where this might affect people who are trying to build on existing footprints, whether they're on mainland or Plum Island. Is that going to be something that's already existing that may be in wet or marshlands or near them? Are they going to be affected by the adding of some regulations that you might want to adopt?
Fair question. And just as a reminder, we're going to try to just sort of see how many other people have that same question so we can do it all at the end.
I don't see a hand raised.
Yeah, the floor is yours until you give it up or until Sam tells me that the 5-minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were saying that. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to not.
It's okay.
I'm just trying to participate. So that would be my question: is how does that work? And also, would you need funding for the things that are you're trying to do? And if so, where would they come from? So I just had more questions than anything else. Okay, I'm going to step out and give the floor to anybody else.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So next up is, I just have Dean showing up.
All right.
We have, is Dean still here? Or whoever's screen name is showing up as Dean?
May have stepped away, I guess so.
We can come back to them if they're taking a meal break.
And jump down to Dan Linden then.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to, so I'm a resident of Newbury in Byfield, and I just wanted to voice my support. I think, a lot of the reasons for these bylaws have been discussed. Something that didn't really come up is that, beyond even the aesthetics, I'm a biologist and a naturalist, so I care about the frogs, but there's also, in the light of climate change and how, the probability of different types of storm events are changing over time, it increases the importance of having wetland resources that are robust. And for a town that has as many wetland resources as we have, it just puts more of an onus on, residents protecting those resources so that when we are faced with challenging weather events, the community can persist through them, right? If we're constantly making choices that impinge on wetland resources, it puts a strain on other parts of our infrastructure as a town. And so, I absolutely care about the ecosystems, but I also think there's actual, tangible value for residents when it comes to protecting these resources. And I don't have any questions. I appreciate all the time and effort that the commission has put into this. I think it's extremely important. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. I think we're going to have lots of time at the end here. All right, Sam, who's up next?
All right. Next up is Drew's iPhone. Maybe? Drew? I think that's Drew. All right. How about Mario?
Yeah, hi. I just found out about the meeting today, so I didn't have a lot of time to look at a lot of the documents on the web. So I just want to say thanks again for taking the effort. And I think this is the exercise here is so imperative based on some of the things that happen. And Dan's very familiar with this at Cricket Lane in Byfield with vernal pools. So I think it's really important that we do define exactly what people can do and they can't do. So it's more about, setting those ground rules for the public and letting them know what can be done and what can't be done in layman terms versus kind of, we discussed earlier, the lawyer's language that happened in the 70s and 80s. So that's about it.
Okay, and for the record, right? Who are you? Where are you from?
Oh, okay. Mario Carnevale. I'm 12 Coleman Road in Byfield.
Excellent. Thank you. And are you sure you don't want more time? Because we have it to give.
I'm good for right now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Samantha, who's next?
Well, we do have Mary back now. I guess if Dean or Drew, I guess.
What is it for if you're on a phone to unmute? Is it *6?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if either of you are on a phone and you don't know how to unmute yourself and you want to say something, that would be how you do it.
Good reminder, Ben.
You're welcome.
So I guess Dean going once. just left. Drew going once, twice. Sold. So I guess we can jump down to Mary if we want to, since she didn't get a chance to speak at the beginning of the meeting.
Hi guys, sorry I was late. I'm reading through the minutes here of the meeting, which is really helpful. Thanks, Sam, for doing that, so I can see sort of what some of the other comments were. And I think generally people were making statements about what the purpose was of enacting this bylaw.
Yeah, so your kind of personal drivers for it, or things that you're particularly interested in.
Right. So I think the main thing that we are trying to accomplish is to establish buffer zone rules where there aren't really any rules right now under the state regulations for what you can and can't do within the 100-foot buffer zone. And so we are looking at, how to be fair across the town with what should be and shouldn't be allowed within a buffer zone. I think that we are, a part of this will be establishing some sort of minimum buffer zone that has to occur on every site. And then beyond that, some sort of rules for how to evaluate other potential projects and impacts within the 100-foot buffer zone to inland wetlands. And I think the impacts associated with constructing in the buffer zone have to do with loss of vegetation, loss of cover, loss of potential groundwater infiltration from impervious areas, loss of water quality from potential roadways and things that might be constructed in the buffer zone. But there are other categories of projects that have lesser impacts if they're occurring within an existing lawn area and it's an expansion of an existing dwelling, things like that, that have, and they're occurring in a flat area where erosion is not a concern or there's not a lot of vegetation proposed to be cleared. So we're trying to come up with a set of rules that's fair for homeowners and existing conditions, but also to be sensitive to new construction in new areas that aren't previously developed and what kinds of standards are necessary in those situations. So it may be that there is some variability in what is and isn't permitted in the buffer zone, and that's what we're trying to get at with this set of regulations and come up with a middle ground that is protective of the resource, but also provides, protection to homeowners in their existing properties to the extent that they're already developed.
All right, thank you, Mary. That's great. So I think with that, it looks like, if I'm reading Sam's notes correctly, we have three questions, all from Rochelle. Dan didn't have questions per se.
Brian, can I make one quick suggestion?
You may.
Probably a couple months ago at this point, we got, if I can find them, I'm in the wrong folder. We got an email from Steve Mangin from Plum Island with some comments that he had. And I did want to make sure that those got mentioned as well. I don't know, Sam, it might be a little bit easier.
Why don't you just cut and paste that whole email in the public comment part of this document?
All right. I will probably do that. I don't know if I can do that from this right now because Dropbox doesn't work so well on my laptop. So I will do that before I send this out to you guys after the meeting.
All right. So then in the meantime, since you've probably got a full-size document that's readable, why don't you read some of that for us so it's on being part of this?
A little bit bigger. So Steve just had a couple comments about the bylaw. Looks like he was looking for some definitions on different things. Explanation on wetlands as carbon sinks. Some expansion on jurisdictional stuff. Questions about variances, asking if it's an existing regulation. Duration of order, so order of conditions. And specifically when an extension is requested, that the commission should consider whether the WPA has changed or if any of their regulations have changed. I don't know what 95.8D specifically is in the
Sam, let's deal with this one this
bylaw.
way. Sam, since we already seem to have finished the public comment and we're going to sort of start in on the responding to it, let's just start with Steve's email. We'll start at the top. We'll just respond. You know, I'll take a crack at it and everyone else can sort of chime in afterwards or not. And then we can turn back to Rochelle's questions and then we can verbally engage with everything in the proper order. Because correct me if I'm wrong, there are no new members of the public that have chimed in the last couple of minutes.
Not that I can see, no new people.
Okay, so then yeah, let's roll into the responding to the public comment part of this. So I can read your screen, this is good. The inland areas, I agree that a definition within the document would be helpful. That can be defined either in the bylaw proposed itself or in the regulations. So yeah, Sam, just put that on the to-do list, put inland areas on the definitions list of things we're going to define.
I would think that that definition would be just areas that are not on Plum Island, the remainder of the town that is not Plum Island. I think that is what the intention was in that description. It's not necessarily it's not the same description as in the Wetland Protection Act. It's for this purpose. It's everything not on Plum Island.
Right, and we can that even by saying the high tide line or the low tide line of the channel, you know, on the back end of Plum Island from there.
I think from our previous meeting, guys, we decided we needed to incorporate definitions anyways.
Yeah.
So I think we can take, I think just my suggestion would be that we write down that this is one of the, as you said, Brian, this is an item we need to find, and then we can tackle that in a different forum.
Right, but to Mary's, I think that is right. It's explicitly exclusive of Plum Island.
I think it was fairly well implied, if not explicitly defined in the document, but we can.
Yeah.
It did say not Plum Island, but I was asking, would it? I think that Newberry is considering doing stuff on the Newberry side, changing things, and would this not eventually parlay to Plum Island? That was my question. Sorry.
Yep, so Plum Island already has its own rule regulations, so we're not touching those.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So it's part of the same document, but they already exist. We're just adding to the document to add inland areas.
I see.
Yep.
And Rochelle, in our previous meeting on this, which was what, for late January, or was it, yeah, late January. You can watch the YouTube of that. The town council, Lisa Mead, provided a nice overview of why those regulations exist and where they came from.
Great, thank you. I try to watch this and I must have missed that, so I will. Thank you.
Yeah, that was towards the end of the meeting from January 20th.
Thanks, Sam.
Good. All right, so what's the next point on the email? Wetlands as carbon sinks, this needs more explanation. While I realize that salt marsh is not an inland area, for salt marsh as sea levels rise and marsh migrates landward as it does, salt marsh peat is buried and becomes a sink. Thus, sea level rise contributes to the carbon sink. Okay, so in this context, carbon sinks means a place that carbon sort of sinks out of the cycle of carbon, the atmospheric physical carbon cycle, and it sort of gets trapped and stays in a certain form for a long period of time, is what's meant by a carbon sink. And so a wetland, you know, the simple example would be something like peat, or something like the marsh itself, where all of the vegetation that makes up the marsh sort of dies and becomes the layer upon which the next vegetation builds. And so it's like ecological Jenga. Maybe Jenga is a bad example because that falls down. But yeah, that's a technical meaning there of a place where carbon goes to stop being in the atmosphere or the ocean and it stays in the soil. Do any of my more technical colleagues want to throw something in there on that, or do you think that'll do the trick for now?
Do we use the term right now in the document?
It's at the top in either the purposes, either the function or the value section.
Okay. So we just should clarify that. It sounds like maybe we don't necessarily have to be specific or use that term. I think that overall, you know, climate resiliency goal of the bylaw might capture carbon sinks and all other related terms.
Yeah. To my memory, Mary, that is something that I suggested. And to my recollection, the reason I wanted to do that was make it sort of a measurable function, you know, something that you could actually pin down, if you will, that, you know, a certain tonnage of carbon by percentages according to a so-and-so paper or study, you know, as opposed to just sort of a broader, vaguer, wetlands are good for climate change. You know, that's, to my memory, that's what I had in mind when I proposed that.
So was it your sense that we would write regulations that would provide some kind of threshold or something? Is that what you're thinking?
The thinking there had more to do with finding a way to make climate change issues other than vague. You know, so that was about it. It was just, you know, taking a stab at something that you can measure and engage with in a regulatory.
Okay, it just wasn't clear to me if this was background or, you know, information in general about wetland functions, or if this was leading to some kind of a regulation or requirement that you were thinking of down the road.
No, the okay. Down the road is down the road. This was just
okay.
Something, but no, there's nothing
okay.
winging it there. Okay, so then moving on to his next point, jurisdiction, the Great Marsh ACEC. He notes that Sunset Drive has seen repeated deposition of gravel to make a parking area and sediment from the activities reported into the marsh, and he would like to see that cease. Okay. Probably shouldn't be happening currently.
That particular issue, I don't really think is something that we can comment on. That, I mean, that project's like coming to an end. They should be coming in actually pretty soon for their COC request. So that one, unfortunately, has been
live wire.
And
yeah, we're gonna leave that alone
at this point.
Live project. Okay.
But I think potentially, you know, looking at projects in the future from that sort of context, as, you know, I'm sure as we already do, looking at things like runoff and sedimentation into marsh areas is definitely something that would get kind of highlighted in this, that erosion control is something we would pay attention to.
Yes, we do that already. All right, good. So let's move on from that one. He points out the language about a variance and wants to know if that's an existing regulation, and if it's new or can be commented on. He does not support variances because they're under the control of the ZBA. Okay, so in this context, we are not engaging with ZBA. We're using similar language for the purpose of basically waiving our own laws if we think that there's a good reason to. As an example, if we were to, I don't know, say that the buffer zone is a fully and completely no build, no disturb zone, and then somebody comes in and they say, well, my entire property is within the no disturb zone and the no build zone, and I need to, you know, build something that I need, right? Like, it doesn't really matter, you know, if it's something you need, it's something you need, we have to be able to be reasonable. And if we craft something that's too strict, we need to be able to recognize that in some circumstances it would be too strict, and we need to grant ourselves the abilities to acknowledge that. So it is not a ZBA issue. It is not sort of crossing into somebody else's court. It is just acknowledging that we might be making a mistake, and if we do, then we can acknowledge that mistake and act accordingly.
Yeah, I think you have to legally have some requirement for whether you call them waivers or variances, so that projects that don't otherwise meet the regulations can be approved, like Brian said, for public health and safety projects, or projects where there is no other alternative to being able to do the project where it otherwise would meet all the requirements.
This is good. I like this, Mary. All right, so he's got a comment about the duration of the orders. So the order of condition being the name of the permit that the commission grants. He understands that the extension of an order of conditions may sometimes be warranted, and he recommends that. And when an extension is requested, Concom should consider whether the Wetlands Protection Act has changed. If so, further conditions should be required, not a simple. Okay, so basically, Mr. Mangan doesn't want us rubber stamping things when they come before us, it sounds like. And I think we can all agree that we don't want to rubber stamp things either. Yeah, so that's just, you know, case by case, project specific. Moving on to his next one, he would like something modified. If the commission determines that a public hearing is warranted, the applicant shall comply with the publication and abutter notification requirements as required for new filing. No public hearing is required for a modification to an order of conditions. Written notification to the applicant by certified mail is required in all cases where the commission initiates a modification, amendment, or revocation of an order of conditions. The applicant shall record modified and amended order of conditions prior to the commencement of authorized work of the order. He says that the town should be responsible for notifying abutters rather than the applicant.
That's actually something that's in the WPA. Not that the town is responsible, but the state law actually says it's at the expense of the applicant. It's the responsibility of the applicant to do that. Right. So we can't change that, really.
Right. And he also thinks there should be a public hearing, since public comment is crucial in making decisions. That, I believe, is a more technical item whereby when it comes up on our agenda, we would address that under our discussion section rather than under our public hearing section.
Just a clarification.
It still comes before us. So maybe, Sam, maybe in our draft, you can write something into the draft law that, you know, we will be seeing you for this decision. I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's going to happen anyway. So in a manner of speaking,
so that's in the context of doing modifications and amendments that, I mean, they have to come in anyways. So
right. And the language as written is legalistic more than clear.
Which is that's something that in my studying of other towns' regulations, most of them have some section that's all about requirements for applications, submittals, requests, everything that you need. Some of them are very, very detailed, and some of them basically just say, call the office and figure it out. But a lot of them have stuff and say that, you know, no matter what you're doing, if your plans are changing, at some point it's going to have to be approved by the commission. And if it goes into a meeting, it has to get public comment or has to have the opportunity for public comment.
Okay, so then maybe the thing that he's suggesting here that we can sort of act on would be putting together in the regulations a plain language rather than legalistic language contribution to how the process plays out, so that you don't have to, translate and understand what is meant by a hearing, or what is meant by coming before a commission, or what is meant by, or maybe it doesn't have to be a regulation. Maybe it just needs to be a worksheet or handout. I don't know. But I take his point that some of these terms are not clear at first glance.
Can I make a comment on that?
By all means.
Thank you. I think that this may be language that was already in the bylaw,
right,
and
yes,
that we are not able to touch. And also that we don't want to do anything regarding the hearing process, notification process, anything that's different than the Wetland Protection Act, or we will get ourselves tied into knots trying to hold two different hearings under two different methods. So
yes,
if we can, we may have to leave this language alone if it's already in there, but I think if we just reference the filing procedures of the Wetland Protection Act, that should cover
right,
us.
Right. I agree, Mary. And I think we can address his point without necessarily engaging with the language. We
Yep.
can just get something for him as a handout, or for other similar individuals who, this obviously is confusing language to me most of the time. So,
yeah.
Okay.
It's like 3 pages in the Wetland Protection Act regulations. We don't need to dump that into this.
No.
So we can just back reference it. Yeah.
Yes, less is more. Yep. So moving on to his next comment about certificates of compliance. As written, it seems that the Concom does not do a certificate of compliance inspection unless it's asked to do so. I recommend it be a routine activity by the conservation agent, certainly after the 3-year time window, or if the applicant wants to extend it to the order of condition timeframe.
That is something I already do. It's not
It's required.
Yeah, it's not compliant. I mean, I guess it is compliance inspections, but I am out in the fields at least like 6 hours a week, just driving around and checking on job sites and stuff. And I believe that there's language in most regulations, at least the ones that I've looked at, that give the commission, its agents, and anyone basically employed by the commission or consulting with the commission full rights to inspect private property under the regulation, like to do the job of making sure that there's compliance with regulations and permits. Not really sure how else to add that.
Yeah, you can't inspect property past the order of conditions date. Anyway, you can't. You can do it a drive-by or whatever you can see from public ways, but
right,
we can't inspect them beyond the permit term.
Yeah, and this is just one of those examples of, when you take language out of context, because, the things that you just spoke of, right, are dealt with on page 10 or page 20 or page 80 of the thing, and he's reading from page 1 or 2, and the legal language is unhelpful for understanding the process. All right, so then on his consultant services on 9513, he disagrees with the wording that if the Concom wants expert services, then the Concom, not the applicant, should pay. And there are many filing fees that the applicant bears. As written, the consultant will be working for the Concom was paid for by the applicant. Such an arrangement contradicts normal contract procedures. And so to that point that Steve raised, basically to oversimplify, it's the applicant's burden to prove a point. And so if the Conservation Commission has a question, then it is the applicant's place to answer it. If the applicant is going to employ somebody to help them answer that question, to ensure that the answer is not biased, This is why that is set up, so that the applicant answers the question and pays for the answer. But then because the commission is the one writing the check to the service provider, the service provider is insulated from undue influence. And so while that maybe contradicts normal contract procedures that Mr. Mangian is exposed to and familiar with, it serves a different purpose than normal contract procedures.
And that is the same thing that every other board and commission pretty much everywhere does. It's any consultants are always paid by the applicant through the town. So like if we were to have Ann Martin come in to review something, money gets, the applicant pays the town into an escrow account and the town cuts the check to the consultant.
And then Mary, do you want to chime in on that? I know you've got some background there.
No, just that the Wetland Protection Act explicitly allows the commission to hire additional experts at the applicant's expense. So you can do it, if you're doing it under the Wetland Protection Act, it doesn't make sense to do it differently under the bylaw. So.
Cool. All right, Sam, do you have any more of these treasures?
I do not. I actually haven't gotten, Steve is the only one that I received anything written from. And like it says on here, this was from back in October.
Okay.
So
well, then let's turn then. Yeah, let's go to Rochelle's questions. Where's Rochelle? There she is.
Right up here.
So effect on Plum Island. And I think we answered this one where we are really trying to not engage with Plum Island. The Plum Island is not a target. It's actively, we're trying to avoid it because Plum Island has a bylaw that is, as was mentioned, it is related to a pre-existing process. And we are going to great measures to not interact with any of the language associated with Plum Island at the risk of tripping over some legal landmine that we are unaware of.
Okay. And the second part of my question was then about the mainland. If it's not affecting Plum Island, it was covering also our town. There's so much marsh everywhere. I mean, I kayak all over and hike all over, so I see how much there is snaking through our town. So when things are, this barrier, the 100-foot, before barrier, what happens when there's an existing place, and just worried about these coastal floods and things, and raising things or new pieces that one put on, or how will that translate to just even repairs? Do you think you're going to change the 100-foot buffer zone to 50 or less?
Yep.
I know you talked about that a little.
Yeah, a good question. We haven't gotten to that granular level. What I would expect, having not talked to anybody else and kind of just shooting from the hip on this one, admittedly, I would expect that there would be some kind of demarcation in the bylaw itself or in its regulations, probably the bylaw, saying that, projects before a certain time go by the old law and projects after a certain time go by the new law. And so on a property, say it was already a house and they want to build a garage, when the house was built, the old laws applied. When the garage is built, the new laws are going to apply. And so the garage might be held to a higher standard than the house was, though they're both occupying the same space. The purpose of trying to put together the regulations ahead of bringing this to town meeting is so that that question can be answered in fine print, and I can actually answer you, as opposed to saying, like, that's on the to-do list and we will have an answer eventually. But that would be my expectation, is that there'd be some version of grandfathering. And I do expect that a discussion of the buffer zone and whether to increase, to Sam's earlier point, what did it say, increase the regulations within it to have a certain no build section or a certain no disturb section. I expect a conversation. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, obviously, because we haven't gone down that rabbit hole yet.
Okay.
And
I did want to. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then your other question had to do with funding, and basically, no, we don't need funding for this. We just need a bunch of volunteers who are willing to.
No, but it's possible there would be additional filing fees under a local bylaw. You have the ability to collect additional filing
fair
fees.
Point. Fair point, Mary.
Yep.
Yes, fair point.
That would be the only, that would, but it wouldn't cost anything to really implement. I just wanted to add to your comments to Rochelle, is just that Plum Island is unique because the entire area is a protected resource. It's a barrier beach, a dune, and all of the construction activity, most of the regulations having to do with Plum Island that are in existence now, have to do with types of housing construction, putting on piers, how much you can add on, what volume you can add on, 50% valuations of, require existing structures to be put on piles and things like that. None of that is anticipated to be part of this inland bylaw that we're proposing. It's not necessary because it's not on a dune. We're not trying to keep sand moving underneath it, and we don't have the same coastal flooding issues inland. There are still flooding issues, and projects still need to meet the FEMA flood, construction requirements. So if you're building in a flood zone, even if it's in an inland area, you still may need to elevate your property 1 foot above the flood elevation. But otherwise, we're not really going to be looking at what the inside of your building would be, or what the construction methods and piles, that kind of thing that we have to spend a lot of time with on Plum Island. Sure. It's not necessary in an inland situation. So Plum Island is regulated, very heavily for a lot of reasons. Initially because of the water and sewer that was installed there, and so there's a high burden for construction on Plum Island. We just won't have the same need. Most of the construction techniques are really pretty typical in inland areas, and we don't have the same issues. I just want to point that out.
Sure. And I may have to hop soon, but I did want to put in that I know how much work time, effort, and dedication this takes, and just wanted to thank you as a resident for what you're doing and a nature lover. So thank you all.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Yes, you're welcome. Absolutely, anytime.
Also, people should see there's new research that came out today using better models, better atmospheric models, and the new research on the Antarctic and Greenland ice shelves, saying that the East Coast is going to see at least 1 foot of sea level rise by 2050, regardless of any emissions changes that are made.
Ooh. Yeah. Ben, did you see the thing where the research like last week or the week before said the current 0.1% storm is going to be the future's 10% storm?
No, I didn't.
That was fun.
That's awesome. So anyways, yeah, there's a lot of good reasons. I think that I'm glad we're tackling this now, because I think there's a lot of, if we don't do it now, town residents and commission members in the future are going to be wishing we did. So anyways.
There you go. The opposite of discounting the future, right? We're actually increasing the price of the future.
Tragedy of the commons.
Okay, so then having addressed all questions from the public, well within our allotted time frame, even the public wants to just like shout out a follow-up question or raise their hands before we bring it back to the commission, by all means, please do so. Just shout or raise hands, or just let us know you're interested in saying something.
Hey, Brian, it's Mario. Just to Rochelle's point regarding, I guess, non-conforming things that are issues that are conforming now and will not be non-conforming after these regulations. That's all taken into consideration. I think you said that.
Did you say that inside out, or
things will be Mario, I think what you're asking is, are things going to be grandfathered in? Which
yes,
they would be.
Basically.
Yeah. So I mean, if you had a structure, so I think like a theoretical game that maybe to answer this question would be like, Brian, if
a septic system was close to a wetlands or something.
Yeah. So connecting to what Rochelle was asking too is like right now we have the State Wetlands Protection Act. So it's just if you want to do something within a 100-foot buffer of a resource area, you have to come to us and tell us what you're going to do and try and get the appropriate permit, and we'll tell you what you need to do. If we, as you said, like a lot of us talked about buffer zones, so we wanted to do this. So if we end up saying, okay, we don't want any new construction, we have a 25-foot setback. That's one possible outcome of this, where basically saying within 25 feet, do you have a resource area? You don't bring us a project where you're doing something. Right. Now, if you have a house and the corner of your porch is already in the 25-foot zone, we're not going to go and say you need to get that out of there. Like that's
or any repairs to that.
Right, exactly. Right. That's the existing footprint of the house. You get to maintain that. We're not gonna be changing. It doesn't change you anything because under the current regulations, if you wanted to do anything like repair that or do something, you would have to come you might have to come to us for a permit because it's in the buffer zone. You're working in the buffer zone.
And I think that the example probably more prominent would be like a septic system that's not within the buffer zone later on. And you have to repair that septic system. So, what happens then?
Yeah, the septic systems get very complicated very quickly because of the Board of Health issues as well, Mario, and what they'll have to do and design for. But generally speaking, there are certainly some properties where you do the best you can because you can only put them in certain places.
Correct. That's it.
And that's where the variances may tend to come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's necessary for public health, because that's the only way the only place it can go, then there has to be an exception.
Yeah, and like the clarity part of this then also comes in where right now somebody might read the Wetlands Protection Act and have that porch within, off the backside of their house, the wetland side of their house that's already at 25 feet and say, oh, I want to double the square footage of my porch because I have grandkids now and they like to come and play on the porch. And this, they could bring that in now and we're going to almost certainly tell them no, but it's going to be, they're going to have wasted money putting in an application and they're going to have to come to a couple meetings and everything else. Whereas now we can have a very clear thing that says like, this commission's not going to entertain something where you're punching out vegetation that close to this resource area because we don't think, benefits we think it damages the resource.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Mario. And then just same thing, anybody else from the public want to throw out any more last second, last minute questions or comments that they'd like addressed? Going once, going twice.
Brian, for future watchers of this, I'll say for those of you who might watch this but did not come, please email us questions. The more questions, the better. The more input we can get, the better. We want to bring something to town meeting that has been fully vetted and we've gotten the thoughts and considerations of as many people from town as we can. So if you're watching this and you missed this meeting, please don't let that stop you. Email Ms. Holt at conservation@town of Newbury and find it on the website and let us know what you are thinking. Thank you.
Do you know her office phone number off the top of your head as well?
No, it's extension 312. Is it 310
no,
or
it's
312?
Not. It's 310.
310. I backtracked. I said, is it 310 or 312?
978-465-0862 extension 310. And
so was Jennifer.
We can maybe use that comment as a segue, if we'd like, into the brief discussion, hopefully, about future public workshops. Hopefully.
But hold on, Sam, hold on. Before you do that, just because presumably this document you're writing will also go on the internet right? Just put in your email and phone number here too, just
yes.
so that excessive,
Yes.
right? But yes, then I think what you said, let's do that.
So hopefully you guys saw my email from last week when I sent the agenda out. So the kind of idea that I had to definitely make sure that this stays at the very least like on the side of our brains, maybe not necessarily in the forefront, but so that it stays in the lane, was to set up some dates for future workshops. So the thought that I had was to go every other month for right now, and do the same thing like what we did this month, where we have one round of public hearings at the beginning of the month, and then the second meeting of the month would be dedicated to a full meeting of just bylaw workshop. Advertise it similarly to like what I've done for this. I'll edit the flyer with the new dates and kind of advertise it aggressively at people, post it all over the place, put it in public buildings. So those two dates right now would be April 19th and June 21st. So to do those two meetings as public workshops, and then after the meeting in June, we can kind of assess as needed. If it looks like maybe we really, really want to do more full meeting public workshops, we can certainly set that up. Do something similar in August, have our second meeting in August be a full workshop, or we can set ourselves up to do, for some time, do sections of the meeting, the regular meeting under other business, just to set aside like half an hour to get comments, to have some discussion on where things are at, how things might have changed. We got new comments in the last month and a half and people want to share with us. Kind of do stuff like that leading up to, it's looking like the chances of having a fall town meeting are pretty slim, unfortunately. From what I've heard, we haven't had a town meeting in Newbury in the fall in quite some time, and we would only do that if it's like absolutely necessary, and they're not going to do a whole special meeting just for us. So chances are this is not going to go in until the spring. So we have quite a lot of time to finish this. But to, instead of saying, oh no, it's November and we need to get this done, to kind of work on scheduling workshops now to make sure that it stays in the public eye. So do we have any issues with doing April and June?
I think you suggested dates are great, Sam.
Okay, so I didn't hear anybody disagree with you. So why don't you put those on the calendar, and we'll go with that until somebody says otherwise.
Can I make a suggestion about the April meeting then? That we update the existing document that that we're drafting and incorporate the comments we receive from town council and the public into the document so that we have a new draft to talk about.
Good. And Mary, to take that one step further, Sam, if you want to sort of put a cover page on the proposed bylaw and or proposed regulations that has these dates on it that we just talked about, so that if anybody actually engages with and looks at, out of curiosity, that thing, they will see those dates well in advance of perhaps advertising or public notice.
All right, and I can add my contact info for that too.
Yeah, let's like aggressively engage here. And Mary, you also make a good point that Sam, if any of those dates are already sort of published as sort of submission deadlines, and you will be hearing on date X if you submit by date Y, if those dates now don't work, if that needs to be updated, that should be dealt with as well.
Yep. So for those two meetings, those will actually go on the second quarter mission meeting deadline schedule that gets posted. So that will be reflected similarly to what I had on this meeting deadline. I post that every 3 months. A new one gets posted for the next 3 months. So it'll be shown that there will be no public hearings on those two meeting dates. And I make sure to let people know that that's happening.
Perfect. Good. This all sounds like planning of the highest efficiency. Okay. So then turning to the rest of the commission, Dan and Pete, you guys have been sportingly hanging out with us here. Do you want to chime in on any points that have been made, or technicalities that have been covered, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't have anything.
And of many words.
I'll go a step further. I think it was a good workshop. I appreciate the public comment and the design. Thanks very much, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ben and Mary and Sam.
Can I throw one more thing out there? It's really quick, I promise. Really quick.
Okay.
So with regards to the development of the bylaw and the regulations, I have a very, very heavy training schedule coming up over the next month. And a lot of the training sessions that I am doing are heavily, heavily involved in climate resiliency, specifically in bylaws. So those are things that I am going to be taking really, really good notes on to bring back into these discussions. So I think it kind of seems like, especially from like what Dan Linden said, from conversations that I've heard from other members of the public, conversations with you guys, climate resiliency and kind of interpreting things in the face of climate change is becoming more of a thing that people are paying attention to, which is really good. So that's something that I will be bringing back to these as well, probably in April.
Good. That sounds very good. To the extent that I would say, tell us you're putting it into the draft and we can comment on it from there rather than.
Yeah, I won't put anything, I won't change the draft without someone telling me to change the draft, because I don't want to.
I will volunteer for aggressively engaging with that. Unless you guys want to. Okay. So with that, thank you for the update, Sam. Who wants to go do something else? Who'd like to make a motion to move on with?
Ready to adjourn. Or move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Beautiful. All right, roll call. Benjamin.
Is everybody still there?
Yeah, we're all here. You got to vote though.
No, I know, but my Zoom screen went to just showing Mary. Now it's just Mary and Mario. Something weird happened. Oh, no, there we go. Sorry. Too many windows. Aye.
Thank you. Daniel.
Yes.
Mary.
Yes.
And Peter.
Okay.
Thank
you.
you.
Sure? I'm also going to vote
Just loves hanging out with us so much.
Well, Pete's not used to this quick meeting thing being done in an hour. He's primed and ready. The man has hardly started.